Hello, coming to my place. Yeah, 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 yeah. 힘쓸은 나의 space. Yeah, 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 yeah. 여기서 내 시간은 slow. 그런 시선은 no, no. 내게로 와 so feeling. 지금 기분에 맡겨 feel it. Hey, hey. 어서 들어와 널 더 알고 싶다면 아무도 모르는 날만 날 보고 싶다면 궁금하다면 follow. 아무 말도 마, oh, oh. 이건 나의 비밀 계정 같은 거는 그런 거니까. 여기선 자유로워 우리 모두 다 말야. 나를 볼 때 반짝인 그 눈빛이 좋아. 어지러지래 feel good. 아찔아찔해 feel good. 지금 내 기분은 rainbow in the sky. 눈이 밝고 올라가. By my side. 다가와. 조금 다른 나를 만나게 해줄게. Cause I feel good, good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. Feel good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. By my side. 다가와. 조금 다른 나를 만나게 해줄게. Cause I feel so good. Feels good. 낮에 뜬다 옆 동그란 문 반짝인 light. 괜찮은 비상구인 것 같아 난. 망설이지 마 아마 재밌을 거야. 여기선 다 매일매일 파티야. Every day at time. 여기선 아름다워 있는 그대로 말야. 내 이름을 부를 때 그 느낌이 좋아. 어지러지래 feel good. 아찔아찔해 feel good. 지금 내 기분은 rainbow in the sky. 기분이 밝고 올라가. By my side. 다가와. 조금 다른 나를 만나게 해줄게. Cause I feel so good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. Feel good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. By my side. 다가와. 조금 다른 나를 만나게 해줄게. Cause I feel so good. Spin me around, spin me around, spin me around and around. I wanna sing, I wanna dance, see you 는 묻지 마. 이 순간 제 빛나는 춤 우리 넘쳐 the moon. Hang me another one. 어지러지래 feel good. 아찔아찔해 feel good. 지금 내 기분은 rainbow in the sky. 기분이 밝고 올라가. By my side. 다가와. 조금 다른 나를 만나게 해줄게. Cause I feel good, good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. Feel good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. By my side. 다가와. 조금 다른 나를 만나게 해줄게. Cause I feel so good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. Feel good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. Feel good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나. Feel good. 나나나나나. 나나나나나.
Right. Now we have sound. Welcome. It's been a little while, and last time I stopped 2 segments from the end of the main part of TIS-100, where so we had successfully got the ability to pluck an arbitrary item out of a sequence and have managed to make it quite a lot faster by having it work both forwards and backwards. Okay, it's actually fast enough that I don't want to run it in fast mode in order to see what it's doing. So each time something was requested, it would run through the sequence and pull the correct item out. Actually, I think when I did this before, what it would do instead... Oh, it could be even quicker, couldn't it? Because it could work out where the next... It could stop each run when it finds the item, and then work out how far it has to go back in the other direction or forwards to find the next one. And that would basically be a bit of extra work in this processor or something. Oops, I have inhaled my tea. Right, anyway. So, yes, there would be an entertaining possibility for optimising this, which is presumably how you get the cycle count down here somewhere. Because, yeah, that'll roughly halve your cycle count again, won't it? I reckon. But I don't think I'm going to attempt that, entertaining though it might be, because we now have the sequence sorter, which appears to have a very long tail in its cycle count distribution. As in, most people manage it in, well, that's presumably somewhere under about 5,000 cycles, and then a few people take 100,000 cycles.
Good job, it's got the fast mode.
Well, we'd better aim to be somewhere on the left, really. Right, so let us enter this, and I've already done a thing, and it's probably a disaster, isn't it? And I have no hope of remembering what it does. Well, let's press run and see what it does. Nothing very helpful. So I think that the plan involved essentially shuttling a sequence back and forth between these two stack memory nodes, inserting new elements in it in the correct location in a kind of insertion sort style. And obviously this doesn't currently work. And one of the trickiness is going to be like detecting the ends at both ends without confusion, because we probably need to know when to stop reading things. So what have we got so far? So we start by setting up a sequence that contains just 1 0 in the right stack memory node, and then we send our first number downwards and check if it was 0, and if it wasn't, then we keep copying things downwards. Right, that sounds reasonable. And so this node will essentially just sit there waiting for that first thing to be processed and then send another one. Don't know if it's the right thing to be initializing the list to all zeros, but on the other hand, something needs to do that, or to only a 0. And yes, we generally want the idea of that 0 is it's the thing that indicates you have reached the end of the contents of this stack memory node. Stop trying to read from it. So then what are we doing here then? We read in our interesting value from above, and then essentially we need to iterate over the items on our list, working out where to insert this one. And so that sub right there, obvious sub right JLZN means if what we get is less than 0, i.e. if the new candidate, hang on, is that going to be the right way around? If the thing that we have just read is greater than the thing the new element we're trying to insert. That seems like that's the wrong way round. Because we want to get them into increasing order. Well, I suppose we don't yet. I don't yet know which way round is increasing. Like, where are we going to? If we're going to read these out from, yeah, let's not worry about the direction for now. See if it sorts things backwards. So JLZN, if we're not going to insert our new element, in which case we expect to get a second copy of the same thing from the right, and we just send that straight down. And then, yes, we extract the thing we're currently working on from back. Why do we then... I suppose at some point we need to do something about the fact that we might... Yes. Yeah, I suppose that the point there is, unless we were right at the end of the list. Though I think this is probably... Yeah, the handling of the end of a list is obviously rubbish here. That's going to require quite a lot of extra care. But on the other hand, I can see a blatant bug here, which is that obviously we want to move that sav into the loop because we want to make sure that the item we're trying to add to the list we don't lose, and that swoop will have thrown it away. Also, why... Oh yes, we're moving that via ACK so that... No, why... That's not right either. Because... Surely we're doing this when we reach... That JNZ is not have we reached the end of the incoming list of things to insert. It's have we reached the list of the end of the current cycle, i.e. do we need to fetch another item to insert? So that should actually be based on the value of ACK that we got from the node to our right. So it should come before that swoop. Obviously there's a slight problem with jumping out of the swoop, jumping out and missing that swoop, because that's also necessary in order, because that obviously has to happen every time we go around this loop to recover the value that we want to insert into the list. We could do a complicated dance up here in order to avoid oh no, I haven't read. I think I read the communications failure message from last. Read the communications failure message last session. So I think we've seen this already. I think maybe not, but we did. I've clearly started on this level. Seeing is a form of control, and if you can see something for its true essence, you will be so tired, eyes need rest. B. Yes. So, part of the problem is I don't really know what this is going to do at the end of the loop anyway. So let's go for the lazy approach now. We'll work out what's really happening later. There we go. Right. Just go into a tight loop there if we reach the end of the list. Is that right? That's not going to help because that means we'll only ever insert one item. I'm clearly going to have to be slightly more intelligent. There, I did not inhale the tea this time. No, that's not going to work. Well, I mean, I suppose... I suppose we can go L there and JEZT there and have a label T up at the top, and that'll do. Why is that doing a MOV right down? at the beginning, is it expecting to find a 0 at the start of the list? That's surely rubbish. Like, we might want to tack a 0, or is it? Oh right, no, that's the 0, of course, that's going to form the terminator for the list here. Yes, right, that seems sensible. And we're also using it as a signal that it's safe to do things, but that's frankly pointless because that mov up ACK can only happen when like everything's ready. So I think that may as well be mov 0 down. And then we can remove that. Plus, what on earth was that doing? Yes, I think maybe I didn't. Surely I looked at it last session. Anyway, so where are we? Yes, so now So I think this processor looks vaguely correct now. So this one then goes for the obvious copy things out of that stack memory node until you hit a 0. And then go to there, which involves signaling downwards, moving one. Yeah, so that stuffs the extra 0 on the end. I don't like that. I think our position should be that we don't stick extra 0s on the ends of that we only terminate the stack with the 0 at the end where it needs to be terminated with a 0. We don't stick an extra 0 on the top of the stack at the end when we finish, because then we just end up having to remove it again and like faff. So, Verity wasn't here this week. I could totally have put on a dark ambient track as our startup. Curses. I mean, music with tentacles that embed themselves in your brain is more or less right for the end of TIS-100. Go and listen to the first track of Inada's The Incarnation of the Solar Architects.
Is that sung by a Black and White Rabbit?
No, not in Arbor. Very different. So, yes. So that all looks perfectly sensible. And we send 2 copies to the left, even if it's 0. And we should probably reorganize. Yeah, we do have a bit of a problem of what. Well, let's see how it works. I'm slightly worried about things, but like we know it doesn't work at the moment anyway. So then, when it reaches the end, because it's copied across a 0, which this one will also use as a signal that it's reached the end, then this processor signals downwards, essentially to say, the stack memory node is probably full, please start reading from it. Now that's obviously a bit ambitious, because it's not until we reach this instruction that the stack memory node is actually full, but that is only 2 instructions later, and conveniently that's approximately how many instructions this lot will take to do anything anyway. So then once this processor down here has heard that the left-hand stack memory node is full, it then essentially starts copying data from it back upwards. And I suppose it's always safe for it to copy the first item, because it's guaranteed there's at least a 1-item list, i.e. something plus a terminator in there. Though admittedly I'm sure I've seen code like this in the puzzles game ID parsing that turns out to be wrong.
It's going to be a TIS-100.
And that does all the obvious things and feeds the data back up there. And that one feeds it up to there with the usual doing things if 0, and the only oddity is we probably want to make sure we copy a 0 in at the top of the stack. So let's just see what this actually does then. So we start by putting a 0 on the stack. And that works correctly. And then we send that 0 to the left. And because that's less than 67, we should put 67 down there. And that 0 there is just a terminator and is not part of the list. And this one now signals downwards. Hello, Eek. Okay, what's going on there then? Something's already gone wrong because we need something to stall these left processors while we're copying the list all the way back up again. So that JEZT is probably a bit ambitious. It wants some kind of a signal from here to say we're ready for you. So let's stick T down here because obviously having the top label at the bottom is sensible. So that one has similarly that JEZD, and that similarly needs I'm thinking we could put this at the top instead, but if we just do this, that should halt things until the right moment. Right, let's try that. So we put a 0 on the right hand thing, it gets copied through, the 67 gets put in front of it. We then don't stuff the 67 onto the 0 onto the stack because that was just the terminator. Then that 67 gets sent back up, so we need to make sure that something moves a 0 in ahead of it. Let's do that. Like that. I mean, I think we've got some code here that was meant to move zeros around that now doesn't and should probably be simplified, but let's see. So we have successfully worked out that we can sort a list containing only 67, which is a good start. Now that list gets its proper terminator fitted. Then we signal ready to do the next insertion pass. So we go (67), 27, 0. Right, we seem to be accumulating zeros at the moment, which is slightly unfortunate. (86), 67. What? 86? There's definitely something going wrong here. Right, I'm going to pay slightly more attention this time. So it starts out okay. As I said, we successfully sort a list containing only 67.
I can do that.
So this thing has gone straight through that right, that mov right nil, as though it got slightly more than it was expecting there. So let's look at the end, how the end of the list goes. So in the first pass, that all looked reasonable, and this processor has stalled waiting for a signal from the right, which is as it should be, and this processor is running through the copying the data back up again code, and then it reaches the end of that and sends a signal to say, right, start the next pass. So that's all good. What? Why on earth is that a JNZ? Oh yes, that's because that's our oh right, Stoats. Yes, I'm using D for two different things. Let's rename that one to E, which is that one, and put D back up here again. Right. So the problem was that I was actually using that jump target for two different purposes, and I had changed its semantics appropriately for one of those two purposes, but not for the other. So this bit works correctly, because it worked fine as long as we were trying to start with a zero length list, but it didn't work for any longer length of list. Right, so now this processor has correctly stalled, waiting for the list to be copied back upwards. So our list now has 86, 67, 27, 19? Where did you get 19 from?
Claire, usually. Wasn't David? I can't remember.
There is no 19 anywhere in this programme. The numbers we're meant to be sorting are 67, 26, 27, 86 and 15. But somehow we have ended up carefully sorting 19 into the list.
I saw it construct with 19. It had 15, and then it was -4, and then it was 19.
Right.
Subtracted something.
So it appears to have correctly constructed the sorted list, except for the fact that it had an extra 19 in it. Like, you put the 15 in there as well at the end.
What the sub-right is doing there in the left processor?
So that is essentially our compare operation. So that subtracts the list item from the current target, and branches based on whether the result is less than 0.
And what happens after that?
So
You presumably have to restore the value you've just destroyed.
yes, which we did. So we save it. That sav saves it into back, and that swoop then restores it from back.
But there's a JLZ, which means you may not do the swap.
So yes, so JLZ is what happens if we don't want to. If we are not about to insert our new item into the list, in which case we end up going down to there, and we first copy the current list item, and that JEZT only happens if we've reached the end of the list, which I now wonder how we ever got. Yeah. Anyway.
And then the swap comes later, and then
Yeah, and that swap does the recovery in that case. And in either case, I'm now slightly concerned by something here, which is that MOVAC down happens in both. No, hang on. No, that's reasonable. I think there might be a problem that we don't know to stop inserting the current item in the list. As in, I think having inserted the correct item, we then have some rubbish in the accumulator, which the next time around the loop we try to insert into the list again. And sometimes that can sometimes happen. Yeah.
19 is the difference between 67 and 86.
Yeah. So I think it's something like when we've just inserted a new largest item into the list or something. Not quite that. Yes, so we should actually go into we should do something to ensure that we don't keep trying to insert this item into the list hereafter. Which means that after, one approach would be to have a completely separate list that's just copy the remainder through. So it occurs to me another approach is to say at this point we stop trying to do this insertion, pack everything back onto the first stack again, because we don't need to copy the whole thing through and then copy the whole thing back.
This is the same logic from the previous.
Yes, what we should be able to do is say this is the moment at which we stop copying, but the slight problem is the whole system's rather pipelined. So we have to. Yeah. So in particular, the processor to the right will probably already have read the first item off the
Yeah, if you want to suddenly reverse the polarity of the data flow, then
yes.
All the processors involved in the data flow have to cooperate in doing it.
Which is quite hard because we don't have interrupts. Well, okay, it would be hellish if we did have interrupts.
That is so true.
So for now, what I think we can do is to add something, put something into the accumulator that we will never be able to add to the list, which is either plus 999 or minus 999. Nope, there's still a 19. But surely if we do MOV 999 ACK, we'll end up just sticking a 999 into the list, which is obviously not what we want. Oh, hang on, we've done MOV 999 ACK, and then we've overwritten it by restoring from thing. Have we? Well, let's try that. Don't know if it'll work. If it doesn't, then I'll actually think about this properly and apply my brain rather than just thrashing around randomly. That seems to be working properly, right? I may have to actually look at the code and think about what it's doing at some stage, because I've run out of code in this processor, so I'm going to have to condense it a little, but it's horribly inefficient at the moment. So that has now sorted things out, except that we now have this 0 that's come in from above and we have no idea what to do with it. And so we're now going to end up trying to sort this. Yeah, everything ends up as a complete disaster at that point. Right. but that looks like we have successfully sorted one list. It's a way of inserting a breakpoint. What is it? Thought there was a way of inserting a breakpoint. Well, right, that'll do. So I think if I just let this run up to the point where it has finished with the first list, the system will probably jam with an incorrect sorting. Oh, well, yeah. Because, well, it's kind of correctly sorted. We've got this spurious 0, and it goes 15, 27, 67, 86. But, yeah. So I think that means that now we can correctly sort the first list. So let's look at where that lands us. Then we insert 86. Then we insert 15. Right, and this processor has probably at that point sent that spurious 0 to the right, because it doesn't really understand what it's doing. And at this point, we have the list correctly sorted, and if everyone had actually told everyone else what to do, this processor could just read off the list from this stack memory node and send it out to the output port instead of sending it back upwards. So, like, that's mostly looking pretty good. So I think I need to improve this processor so it's not a complete disaster, and that should give me enough space to sort out the end of list processing. So surely we can simplify this a bit. So at the moment we have that jump to there, and then
that step to the
that then sometimes jumps to there. That's an unconditional jump, which is only hit if we reach N. But on the other hand, it doesn't go all the way up to the top, because we start by terminating the list nicely. So, not as obvious what I can squeeze out of this as I had hoped. So, what are we actually going to want to do here? What we're going to want is to have, when from up we receive a 0, we're going to have to do something clever. So that means we're going to want to insert something just after here that's JEZ somewhere, and in that somewhere we signal to the processor to the right to signal to the processor down that it's time to start reading out the entire contents of the stack and probably writing something in here and then going down to T. So that probably means we need to be able to get 2 more instructions in. So yes, the problem is we have to have those 2. So let me see. That has to, yeah. So that has to happen after we've done the move MOVAC down, because the point is that this one will only send each element twice, and so this one has to either send the new element down and then send one from the right, or just send the one from the right. And so that's why this JLZ just jumps over a few instructions. So then we do swoop in order to recover the accumulator, which we have to do on both branches. Or rather, swoop and then salve. Feels like we've got slightly too many of these swoops and salves. So that one is used to recover the value for future comparisons. And is kind of, and that one is used to recover the value that we need to save right. We need to push down right now. And obviously we don't really need to do both of them at any time, but that doesn't help us because we need both under different circumstances, and they obviously have to happen after the branch, because the branch is what it has to be based on the accumulator that tells us whether we've got greater than or less than. So I think those 2 swoops have to happen. And that's the only thing that can decide when to end this loop. Kind of that -999 ax sav seems like a rather... Incidentally, it could be -1.
I did wonder vaguely why it needed to be that.
So and yes, then that has to be saved, and we need that to happen before we do this. We can't just jump back to the top of the loop and use that sav, because that puts us in completely the wrong place. Because we need to, after pushing a new item onto the list, we need to move another item. We need to also put in the next item from the original list, so that we are properly synchronized with this processor, which is going to be sending us 2 of each one. So that all seems reasonable. This is annoyingly not as terrible as I had hoped. And that's the end of list handling. We obviously, I mean, I could replace back with another processor whose sole job is to remember things, but that's kind of painful. I mean, I suppose. Does that help us? I'm kind of going, can we... Because this mov write nil is just a synchronization operation. So if we were to replace it with something that signalled to the right whether or not we had just hit the end of the list, that would do the job. So... But the thing is that they're... So what happens? Actually, could we do that just by making that mov up right and having up send us 2 copies of each number? So then that mov nil left... Well, for now, let's make that mov left nil instead. So I think that should still work. So that this is only reached when we've finished processing an input from above, and then we attempt to process the same input again. Or rather, then we read the same input again. So we read each one precisely twice. And then that means that this one gets to see each input and can decide whether or not it's an end of list input. So let's test that that works correctly for constructing the target list. Actually, let's well, we'll watch it slightly carefully when we hit that instruction each time. So then we send an 86. We haven't yet reached the end of the list. And it's the reading of that item by the right-hand processor that signals the left-hand one to start the next cycle. So there is a problem here, but we'll worry about it in a moment. Which is that this processor thus only gets to see that we have reached the end of the list after it's copied the entire list back up into the wrong stack memory node. But we can fix that. Anyway, let's just run through this for the last time. I think. Yes, so the 0 has now arrived and is being, well, mostly ignored, to be honest, because obviously 0 sorts right to the end of that list. And then we send a 0, which this processor should treat as hang on. Yes. As it's time to do something. So yeah, that doesn't quite work. So the problem now is that while we get the data, get the end of list signal here, we get it rather late. Now we could arrange, this might work. So what we could do though is we could maybe could we arrange to send that one not as the last item that we've processed, but as the next item that's to be processed? So the first time around the loop, we would only send one copy. Ugh. And then subsequent times around the loop, we would send 2 copies. So we would do something like that. So now let's go through constructing the list again. So we want to pause at the point when the constructed list includes a 15. And then we do end up copying it up again, which is slightly silly, because this node is going to carefully merge that 0 into the list. But now this node is about to be informed by reading that 0 that this is the last pass. So if it could remember that, it could use it and do something different. But now it's being informed too early, which is better than too late, because at least causality works in the correct direction.
What do you think, etc.? I think causality worked in that direction.
Because we could thus stash that in back. We don't use back in this processor yet, and then pull it out at somewhat later. But that is kind of ugly. I mean, it's kind of ugly that we end up doing an entire extra pass as well. Which we do. I mean, this one really doesn't understand any of. Oh, let's not worry about that for now. Let's see if we can do this. So now that we've reached here, we want to say move that into ACK instead. But I'm going to need that space. And then then what we would need to do is, if it is, we really want to negate, we want to say, if it's 0, make it non-zero, and if it's non-zero, make it 0, but that's far too painful. Because our slight problem is that we start up with back being 0, and thus we don't want to immediately abort our saving our first list generation because back is 0. So I mean, the obvious thing was going to be sav here and then swoop and compare somewhere else, but but that won't work because we need to arrange that 0 is treated as a value that means we should carry on. So we can do sub 1, which will turn 0 into -1. And then sav. And then at the point where we would where we want to signal downwards that something should happen, what we send down is now -1 if you should write out the data, and not -1 if you shouldn't. So then here, this will be our output loop, which just goes something like that. This is probably not correct, but let's see what it does. So, yes, well, there's a slight problem. Having added an extra subroutine there, we obviously need to ensure that we don't fall into it. Yes. So this is all going fine, but that's not unexpected because we haven't yet hit the code we hadn't tested before. So then we have the last slightly weird pass. Oh, we've gained an extra 0, that's bad.
And outputters as well.
Yes. Okay, that went very badly wrong. So now we're copying. Where did that 0 come from?
Very sleepy. Good night. elsewhere. Words. Me going off to holidays and working in the mushrooms. Snooze. Good folks. You snooze.
So now we have the 0 that's the indication of the end of the input list, which that write processor converts into a -1 and saves. There's a second copy of that 0, which this processor now knows marks the end of the input list. Ah, right, yes, that's where it came from. That processor does the wrong thing. Right. Because this one, immediately upon reaching the end of a list, attempts to erase this stack memory node. Attempts to write the terminal 0, the top of stack marker, onto that stack memory node. But it doesn't know that it needs to wait for all of this lot to finish its processing first. So just to prove that, let's try putting that in there. Just stop that processor as soon as we find end of list, and don't try to reset everything. And then everything jams up because the first element on the list is wrong. Well, that'll do the job for now. Let it run for a bit, but Okay, something else. Oh, must have run. What? Suddenly, what emptied that stack memory node so quickly? Stoats. Has one more pass, of course. Right. Ah, yes. Stoat face. That O loop there has to be split into two. Right, so we've successfully sorted the first list and output it. That's a nice start. I noticed that this stack memory node already contains a 0. So what's going on now then? So what I think, I don't quite understand where that 0 came from, because I think that this node should at this point be expecting the new contents of that stack to appear, and this node should be providing it, and usually it would do that by copying from that node, but obviously it has nothing to copy, but it could instead send a 0, which then this one should process. I'm assuming we're now surely trying to execute that mov down up. Oh, there's a mov 0 up there, right. So that's happened already. So then, in that case, do we just stick a mov 0 up here to say, so that 0 was the top of stack marker, and then we send an empty list up from there. And then I think we might want to twist things around a bit so that mov 0 right, it actually is that mov 0 up by changing the shape of this loop a bit. Because now I think so that's better, is it? And that one is still jammed somewhere. That's not what I was expecting. We've got 2 zeros there, which is wrong as well, because that has a mov down up, and we should remove that mov down up because it's not correct anymore. Right. Right, now where have we jammed? I think that's now jammed in the correct place. This processor has stopped because we need to get the startup procedure right. This processor is trying to read from that one. This one is trying to read from that one. This one is trying to read from that one. And we have an empty list in that, an empty sequence in that stack memory node, as we should have at the start of the next cycle. So, I mean, we can probably do this correctly just by going, well, at that point we'll jump to there. Doesn't quite work. It's not looking so bad, though. Like, it's got some of the next list. There's the 10. Why is the 10 there? And then we've got 46, 59, 59, 63, 90. We've lost the 68. So it's not perfect, but it correctly, like, processed a bunch more data. Well, okay, it processed a bunch more data incorrectly. So up to the point where it copies out. So it looks like it's already done something with the beginnings of that list. So I think that might be our problem. But surely this one should just stop reading while that writing out is going on. Okay, let's watch that. So, where has the 68 got to? The 68 is there. Oh, because again we have a slight startup problem. Bit dubious about this, but let's see if it works. Oh. Okay, that didn't work. I mean, I think actually the startup procedure is completely backwards. And I should fix that. So the fact that we have two different ways that we mark the top of the stack is clearly wrong. But the question is, can we avoid that? Especially given the instruction constraints in this processor. So it really ought to be the case that MOV0 up is the one that always marks top of stack, rather than on the first cycle it being this one that marks top of stack. So we do that just before we copy the list from this processor upwards. So So what if we started by copying that list upwards, i.e. this one started by sending an empty list. This processor then copied that empty list up to here. And then arrived at, and then signalled that it was ready to go by reading from here, which would read from here. So that essentially involves rotating all of our lists, all of our loops. So this loop would start with that MOV0 up. That's a nice simple one. So it's this processor starts by sending an empty sequence upwards. This processor then starts by expecting to read a sequence from down. So it starts by doing that lot. So it repeatedly reads from down. If what it first ties a knot in the top of the stack, then moves repeatedly, reads from down. If it has read a 0, does something. If it hasn't read a 0, sends it upwards and goes back around the loop. When it reads a 0, it then attempts to read from the processor to its left and uses that to decide whether it's reached the end of the next input sequence. If it hasn't, or rather saves that for in a little while working out whether it's reached the end of the next input sequence, and then shovels the list through the inserter and then checks whether it had reached the end of the input sequence, or rather asks this processor to check whether it has reached the end of the input sequence, which it will do by reaching this instruction. So that looks good. So this processor then thus has to start by writing from up to right the first copy of the first item in the list, and then it processes the second one. So that then means that we can throw away that MOV0 right and also this rather weird startup behaviour. And I think we can just boil this down to that. Maybe. Okay, oh, no, maybe something hasn't gone wrong. Maybe I've just turned all of the loops in the program, well, not so much inside out, but have rotated them all, made their entry points in a different place, and in the process got the program to work. Cute. And it's a lot more believable now than it was. 2,000 cycles isn't bad, is it? I mean, as I said, it could probably be more efficient, but yes, it's better than 100,000 cycles. How do you do this in 100,000 cycles? I'm using an insertion sort on a processor without random access memory. though actually we're not doing too badly for an insertion sort. I mean, I think we are only at order n squared complexity here. I could break it go fast, but like, there's all this stuff happening. So, we've still got 20 minutes before midnight. We can have a go at the last one. As I recall, the last one is one of the easier ones compared to this. We get to test. Yes, we even correctly sort the zero length list. Minimum number of nodes, pretty low instruction count. Astonishingly, considering how much I was packing in, and quite a decent cycle count as well. Excellent. So the last one, stored image decoder. No message from Randy here. Did he reach this far? Read a length value from in. Read a colour value from in, draw a line of that length and colour, wrapping when the edge of the image is reached. Well, we're building a terminal emulator. Simon will be very good at this. I mean, that feels like it ought to be pretty simple. So the slightly tricky thing is like that we have multiple... we have kind of a bunch of stuff to keep track of. We need to keep track of the X position of the cursor and the Y position of the cursor and the count of things that we're currently emitting and the colour of the things we're currently emitting. But that shouldn't be too hard. And I think the best approach here is successive lowering of the level of the instructions that we're getting. So we start with this run length encoded thing. And obviously, to me, the first thing we do is we replace that with an uncompressed version where we just emit a long sequence of pixel values. So we emit 222222222, blah blah blah, etc., 33333333, and so forth. And then the next processor will handle inserting new lines in the right place, and the next processor will handle working out what the Y position of the cursor is. So given that, we start with a length value. We better save that. And then we have the value that we're going to want to emit n copies of. Then we swap back again. If our counter is 0, then, as in if we were asked to emit 0 of them, then immediately go back to the start. Otherwise, sub 1, swoop, mov, act, down, swoop. Is that the right number of swoops? Can remove that one because we can use that swoop there. Or we don't need it. Hang on. Yeah, that'll do. Yes, Uncle Randy has been known to be no, I don't think he was missing. I think we did. Hang on, let me find we were all still in shock here from Uncle Randy's sudden passing, while we wait for word from the examiner about the cause. So I think he's not missing. He is very definitely dead. So I think that will now handle the run length decoding. Let's make that mov up ACK. There's always a body. I mean, this is kind of inefficient with all those swoops going on. But it'll probably do. So could we do this more elegantly? I mean, we are after all going to have to use 4 processors, and I did count 4 variables. So maybe it's a bit silly to be stuffing 2 of those variables into the first processor. And we could instead have this one just do the counting. So it replaces so what we could do is go have this processor not do the full run length decoding, but have it emit, here is the value you are going to want n of, then I will send you in unary n. So then we have this one having this very simple bit of microcodiness, and then this one instead does we do length then a colour, so we stick the length in the accumulator, we send the colour down. It'll be slightly more self-explanatory if I do that. So we say save the accumulator, send the length down, then if we have reached the end, jump to there, send a please emit 1 character thing down, jump back to L. So now we should get the run length decoded version all the way down here, and we should be able to see. We probably want to do some subtraction so we actually get the decoding happening. Right, that seems to be working. So now this one wants to handle line wrapping. So the line wrapping is going to be mildly fiddly. Where's my instructions on the So the visualization module is 30 characters wide. So let's start with mov30 ac. And then our loop is something like mov up. What do we actually send to the visualization module? Maybe I don't care yet. So maybe what we do is we have two instructions we can send to the right, which are print a character and new line. So normally we just do actually no, let's go JEZ LF. Two character label. We're getting extravagant here. It really should be JEZCRLF, shouldn't it? Though actually the CR comes from that. Actually, I think we start with a CRLF. So maybe that makes life even simpler. So we output x coordinate, y coordinate, color values. So the x coordinate is always 0. The y coordinate will be in the accumulator of this processor, and the color value will be processed very shortly. We have the slight problem that we have to work out how this starts up. We'll worry about that in a bit. Yes, so we do have the slight issue that on the first line we don't want to send a -1 to terminate the previous thing. Or possibly we send a dummy 0, 0 in order to get it going. So, and then we can losing the ability to type here. Right. So that -1 terminates the previous string, with these two instructions starting a dummy string at the beginning so that we can start with a new line. And then our other operation is emit a color, which is just mov left down. Right, so what were we doing? So that's CR, that's LF, more or less. So then we do mov up right, jump L. Let's see what that does. That appears to be utter rubbish. Excellent. What was that doing wrong then? So that first sends out zero zero as we expect. Minus 1 0 0. So that didn't quite work, because if we need to actually put in the instruction to jump, cause this one to actually do the right thing. Right, that's better. That's better. Right, let's see if this works. Well, it started okay, but someone has forgotten that line feeds actually require you to increment the line counter. Let's try that instead. What? No, that's very wrong. Oh, because that 5, I've added an extra instruction in the loop, so that 5 is now a 6. That's better. No, that's still broken. The accumulator never seems to be changing here, having increased to 1. Oh, we forgot to actually ever subtract 1 from the column position either. Right, let's try that. That's better. Now, do we accidentally lose a character at the new line? Doesn't look like it. You may have got this correct. Just in time for midnight. Kind of stalls weirdly at the end of each line, doesn't it? Nothing in this has yet required us to actually write red to the console, has it? This is all looking perfectly sensible. Wondering if I could have made this more efficient. I mean, probably. Though JROs do tend to be quite efficient. Interesting that this is the processor that's working the hardest. I suppose it's doing like quite a lot of instructions per character, isn't it? As it's got essentially none of those. Yeah, it's got that extra subtraction that this one doesn't have to do, and a jump or something. Am I just going to hit fast? This is the last level. What will I do afterwards? It's possible. Obviously this could be made more efficient by not writing all those zeros out of the console, because the console starts black. That would be kind of tricky though, because then we'd actually have to do explicit rightward cursor movements. We wouldn't just always reset the cursor to the left edge of the screen. So at least we don't have to handle double width characters, which is what Simon keeps asking me about at the moment. That doesn't look very random to me. Still, it tests our ability to cope with really long runs. So, almost done. What have we found? Hello. Well, that was odd. And that's the end of the game. And for some reason it starts up having selected the simple sandbox. So, yes. I think I should probably stop there. Good night.